Today we discuss the events that took place in the American state of Texas. 21-year-old Julie Ann Gonzalez was a young mother from Austin who disappeared in March 2010 under mysterious circumstances. Julie was last seen alive on March 26, 2010. Her family became concerned when they did not hear from her during the day. Julie's aunt went to the police and reported her disappearance. It was a very confusing case, and to find out the truth about what happened to Julie, investigators examined digital evidence. The last text messages that Julie sent were very strange. They contained inconsistencies. They contained spelling mistakes and slang that was not typical of her way of speaking. After Dora, Julie's aunt, reported her missing, a police officer was dispatched to her home. Dora said that no one in the family had seen Julie since the morning of Friday, March 26, 2010. They had planned to meet for lunch that day, but Julie did not show up. This was odd, as she had always honored the arrangements. If she had a change of plans, she would have given notice. That same day, a police officer met with Julie's mother, Sandra. The officer told Sandra that the police had received another call related to Julie. Her husband, George Dela Cruz, with whom she was separated, had called the police and said that Julie had failed to show up for a meeting to pick up their joint daughter, Layla. Julie's family immediately realized something was wrong, as she could not abandon her daughter. Now we need to go back in time to learn more about who Julie was, how she met George, and how their relationship developed. I also want to warn you that the information I'm about to give you is not my speculation or fiction. It is information posted on the Texas District and County Attorneys Association website, so it can be considered the official version of the authorities. So I'm quoting from the Assistant District Attorney's report. George Dela Cruz and Julie Ann Gonzalez met while attending Crockett High School in South Austin. After graduation, the young couple moved into a place of their own. After about a year, they had a daughter, Layla, who was the center of Julie Ann's attention. The young family relocated a couple of times as they struggled to make ends meet and eventually moved in with George's mother, Victoria Dela Cruz, and his 3 younger sisters. After a few years of dating, George and Julie Ann got married in May 2009. Though they married, Julie Ann was not happy with George, and she struggled to make the relationship work. She was ambitious and hardworking and wanted financial security. She had received a scholarship to attend St. Edward's University, but dropped out after she became pregnant with Layla. Needing to financially support her family, Julie Ann began to work at a Walgreens in East Austin as a cashier. She enrolled in a pharmacy tech school, eventually earned her pharmacy tech degree, and was promoted to the Walgreens pharmacy. Unlike Julie Ann, George was not motivated and seemed satisfied with living at home with his mother and sisters. George did not have steady employment, working on and off as a security guard and construction worker. He spent the majority of his time playing video games on his Xbox and spending money on his gaming addiction. Julie Ann was not happy about George playing Xbox for hours on end while she worked, and she voiced her concerns to him when his gaming interfered with his responsibilities as a father. It became commonplace for Julie Ann to come home from work and find George playing on his Xbox and their infant daughter wearing dirty clothes with a soiled diaper. After a few months, Julie Ann realized that she had made a mistake in marrying George. She and Layla moved out of the house and into her grandfather's place in Dripping Springs. She filed for divorce in December 2009, only 7 months after they married. So we can conclude that George and Julie's relationship was doomed to failure. He liked living with his mom, he didn't want to work, he didn't fulfill his fatherly duties, and all he was interested in was video games. Unlike him, Julie wanted to develop, she studied, she worked, and she took care of her daughter. There was another important person in Julie's life that cannot be left out. In the Assistant District Attorney's report, not only is Julie's relationship with her husband George described, but also her relationship with Aaron Bro. Pay special attention to this photo. It shows Julie and Aaron. This picture will play an important role in the investigation. Now I'm going to read information from the Texas District and County Attorneys Association website that I've already mentioned, and this information too can be considered the official version of the authorities. I quote, "When Julianne was in high school, before she met George, she worked at her grandfather's taco stand and convenience store. She was a responsible and hard-working employee, friendly, personable, and well-liked by the customers. While working at her grandfather's store, 17-year-old Julie became friends with a co-worker, Aaron Bro, who was 23. The longer they worked together, the closer they became, and a mutual love interest began to develop. Julianne's mother, Sandra Soto, kept a close eye on them and noticed that her teenage daughter was getting too close with an older man. Sandra confronted Julianne and Aaron about the nature of their relationship and made it clear that they could not see each other romantically given the difference in their ages. When it was evident to Sandra that Julianne and Aaron continued to pursue a relationship, Sandra met with Aaron and fired him from her father's store. This ended their relationship, and Julianne was upset and heartbroken. Several years later, when Julianne's marriage to George had begun to deteriorate, she ran into Aaron at the grocery store. Happy to see each other, Julianne and Aaron embraced, chatted for some time, and exchanged contact information. Soon after, they began to email back and forth and arranged to go on a date. It was evident that their feelings for each other had resurfaced, and their affection was strong despite the passage of time. Excited about their reconnection, Julianne and Aaron began to see each other romantically. Julianne confided in Aaron that she was not happy in her marriage and was going to file for divorce. As their love grew for each other, Julianne and Aaron made plans for their future, moving in together, getting married, and having children. They were like-minded. Aaron, like Julianne, was ambitious, hardworking, and responsible, and he had goals for his life, his own apartment, and steady employment as an electrician. Knowing that Julianne was not legally divorced and that George was not taking their breakup well, Julianne expended great effort to keep her relationship with Aaron a secret from her husband. She introduced Aaron to little Layla as her friend, and even made it a point to not use Aaron's name around the little girl so that Layla would not inadvertently mention him to her father. She also marked her MySpace page private so that only her friends could view it. Once she separated from George, she deleted him as a friend. So from the report, it is clear that another man has come into Julie's life. She carefully hid the relationship and filed for divorce in December 2009. But 3 months later, she disappeared. On her social media accounts, Julie wrote that she was happy. She wrote in her account that she couldn't wait for Layla's return because she missed her so much. She posted this entry on March 24, 2010, 2 days before she went missing. She was supposed to pick up her daughter from George's house, but never did. After the family reported Julie missing to police, investigators began interviewing her friends and family. During their interviews, they discovered that on the afternoon of Friday, March 26th, after she was last seen, Julie sent text messages. These messages stated that she had voluntarily left for Colorado with a man named James. Evidence indicated that this was a routine missing person investigation and that Julie had indeed left of her own free will. However, Julie's family couldn't believe that she could leave her daughter Layla, leave her new boyfriend Aaron, leave her entire familiar life. Since Aaron was one of the last people to see Julie, investigators talked to him. He reported that, like Julie's family, he was confused. According to him, Friday morning when he left for work, everything was fine. Then, at about 2:30 p.m., he received a text message from Julie that said, "Aaron, I can't do this anymore." He immediately tried to call her, but she didn't answer. Then, on Saturday morning, Aaron received another message. Julie had written, "Aaron, I didn't mean to hurt you. I want to be truthful with you. You're a good guy, just not for me." Aaron was confused. He asked Julie why she was dumping him via text, to which Julie replied, "It's too hard. I'm sorry, I tired. It's too hard. I want to be truthful. You're a good guy, just not for me." When investigators talked to Julie's friends and to Aaron, they had no reason to believe that anything was wrong with her or that she was in danger. The messages were sent from Julie's cell phone, and it looked as if she was actually hiding of her own free will. On March 27, 2010, the next day after she was last seen, Julie posted a message on a social media account saying that she was fine and that she did not want to be disturbed. The next day, March 28th, Julie's aunt Dora got in her car and started driving around the neighborhood. She stopped at the Walgreens store near her house and looked into the parking lot. Julie's car was parked there, but Julie herself was not in the car or in the store. A detective who arrived after the 911 call examined the outside of the car and looked inside, but there was nothing of note. The discovery of Julie's vehicle was an important aspect of the investigation. During the inspection, it was determined that Walgreens did not have any exterior surveillance cameras, however. They were installed inside the premises. Law enforcement officers reviewed the surveillance footage from the security camera installed at the entrance of the store. However, it did not capture Julie's appearance. Because of this, it was unclear at that point whether she had left the car in the parking lot by herself or whether someone else had done so, someone who wanted and hoped that Julie's car would not be found for as long as possible. It's very strange, but the police did not seize Julie's car for forensic examination. The police later admitted they made a mistake. The only potentially important witness that investigators have yet to talk to was Julie's husband, George, with whom she was living separately, and I will remind you that she filed for divorce 3 months before she disappeared. Julie's family learned from George that she had asked to keep Layla for a few days. However, Julie's family did not believe his words. They believed that Julie would not have left Layla with George for a long time. Layla was the most important person to her. Julie was a very responsible person, unlike George, who still lived with his mother and did not have a steady job. He spent all his time at home playing video games. A detective went to George's home to talk to him. George said he last saw Julie on Friday, March 26th, and that she told him she wanted him to keep Layla, their daughter, because she had some things to do. She did not return to his home again to pick up Layla. George allowed the detective to go into the house and look around. There was no sign of her presence inside, no evidence of a crime, nothing to be alarmed about. Once again, the police began to suspect that perhaps Julie was fine and just didn't want to be found. But soon, investigators began to doubt this. Before her disappearance, Julie was an active user of social media. She had many postings on MySpace. But 2 days after her disappearance, Julie stopped texting and posting on social media. This was highly suspicious. Time passed, but there was no progress in the investigation. In May 2010, 5 weeks after Julie was last seen, the case was transferred to the homicide unit. Other investigators began to delve into the case and started checking out the people who were closest to Julie. The police knew that Aaron had a relationship with Julie. The night before she disappeared, they had spent together, and so Aaron became a suspect. Investigators decided to re-interview him. Here's what the Assistant District Attorney's report says about Aaron's testimony and what happened the day Julie disappeared. I quote, "The night before, Julie Ann spent the night with Aaron at his apartment. They had had dinner and stayed in watching movies. Early the next morning, Aaron woke up Julie Ann when he was heading off to work to tell her that he loved her. She asked him to take the day off and spend it with her since she didn't have to work that day, but Aaron had to decline. He would not get paid if he skipped work. So he kissed Julie Ann goodbye and told her that he would see her later that evening. After Aaron left, Julie Ann handwrote him a long love letter where she told him how much she wished that he was still cuddling with her in bed and that she loved him very much. Julie Ann expressed how happy she was to be in a relationship with him and that he made her feel special and beautiful. She looked forward to getting married and having a son together. Julie Ann left the letter for Aaron on his bed, then she left to pick up Layla at George's house. Aaron never heard from her again. The Assistant District Attorney's report also indicates how Aaron perceived the text messages Julie sent him, and I quote, "Aaron was not convinced that it was Julie Ann who was sending those text messages. He challenged the person with Julie Ann's cell phone to text Aaron his middle name. The response was, 'I don't have time to play games.'" Throughout Aaron's workday, he continued to call Julianne, but she would not answer his phone calls. Later that day, he read her MySpace post that she was going to Colorado with a web designer named James and that she hoped James would show her a good time. This new development upset Aaron, so he began frantically calling her. Finally, Aaron texted Julianne and gave her an ultimatum. If she did not call to explain what was going on, their relationship was over. Julianne never responded. When Aaron got home from work that evening, he discovered the handwritten love letter. He was confused and did not know what was going on or what to believe. Thus, it is obvious that Aaron immediately had doubts that Julie was the one who wrote the text messages. Also, don't you think it's odd that when asked for a middle name, his interlocutor wrote, "I don't have time to play games"? Writing a name would be a lot quicker than writing that sentence, wouldn't it? We can assume that whoever wrote the text messages on Julie's behalf did not know Aaron's middle name. It didn't make sense that Julie would write a love letter to Aaron on paper and then a few hours later send him a text message on his phone telling him she was leaving with another guy in Colorado. This was an obvious red flag for investigators. Something was wrong because apparently Julie had no reason to leave. In order to finally clear Aaron of suspicion, the investigators suggested that he take a polygraph test. He did not hesitate to agree to this and passed the test without any problems. Julie's case was unusual from the start. The police had no crime scene, no physical evidence. All they had were digital traces. So the authorities decided to take a closer look at the digital evidence again and try to understand the real reason for Julie's disappearance. The Austin Police Department brought in Jim Cook, a digital forensics expert, who began to look at all aspects of the case. During this time, Julie's family did everything they could to bring as much attention to the case as possible. The family made flyers with her picture on them and hung them all over the city. Information about Julie's disappearance was posted on billboards. They hired a private investigator to interview anyone who might have information about what happened to Julie. The family held fundraisers and vigils and invited local media. But unfortunately, all the efforts made by the family at that time did not help to get closer to solving Julie's disappearance. Digital forensics expert Jim Cook analyzed the grammatical features of language to compare the way Julie wrote text messages before and after she disappeared. Before she disappeared, she spelled words correctly. She had upper and lower case letters, had correct punctuation. And then, after Julie disappeared, there were misspelled words, missing punctuation marks. It was obvious that the language pattern before and after Julie's disappearance was different. This suggested that the text messages were not actually written by Julie, but by a criminal who had taken possession of her phone and who was trying to cover his tracks. After analyzing Julie's bank transactions, investigators found an important lead. On the day Julie disappeared, Friday, March 26th, her bank card was used to pay for items at a Walmart about 3 miles from where her car was found. Now, to provide you with the exact wording, I'm going to quote again from the Assistant District Attorney's report, which states, "Police detectives analyzed Julianne's bank records and discovered that the day that Julianne disappeared, her debit card was used to make purchases that were processed as credit, not debit transactions. This was significant because her bank records showed that Julianne's habit was to make PIN-required debit transactions with her card, not credit transactions. Detectives went to Walmart and McDonald's where the transactions were made and reviewed surveillance video to see if Julianne had made these purchases. The video showed George pushing a grocery cart with a grocery bag and Layla inside. Julianne was nowhere to be seen. The video's timestamps were minutes apart from transactions on Julianne's debit card. George never mentioned that he and Layla had been to Walmart on the day of Julie's disappearance or that he had used Julie's bank card. It was becoming increasingly obvious to the investigators that George was someone they needed to take a closer look at. They decided to look into Julie's relationship with George in more detail and found a lot of disturbing data. The report states, to track the movement of Julianne's cell phone, detectives enlisted the assistance of Jim Cook, a cell phone expert, to analyze Julie's cell phone records. Because George's cell phone service was disconnected, Cook tracked only Julie Ann's phone movement via cell site towers. He found that on March 26th, the day Julie Ann disappeared, and through March 27th, her phone was in the vicinity of George's house for extended periods of time. There were over 100 texts and 20-plus data connections during this time period, which was uncharacteristic of the phone's past activity. Usually, Julie Ann's cell phone would depart from George's house within a few minutes of arrival. Cook also found that on March 26th, Julie Ann's phone was in the vicinity of a particular Walmart and McDonald's where her bank card was used and where George was captured on surveillance video. Later that evening, the phone was in the vicinity of a Best Buy where George was purchasing Xbox equipment using his store credit and account. All of the incoming calls for Julie Ann on the morning of March 26th were either not answered or diverted to voicemail. This was not typical of her call history before that date. There was no more cell phone activity on Julie Ann's phone after March 27th. Plus, her phone never left the Austin area and had never traveled to Colorado, as her MySpace post claimed. In fact, Julie Ann had never placed a call to, nor received a call from the state of Colorado. So, as we can understand, George's name has been coming up more and more in the investigation. But that's not all. Detectives learned that George was taking it hard when Julie decided to divorce him. He tried to manipulate her. Here's what the report says about that. As George realized that he was losing Julie Ann, his mental well-being deteriorated. The two did not spend the Thanksgiving holiday together in 2009, and after that, George sought Julie Ann's attention by claiming to have amnesia from an accident at work. He acted like he did not recognize her or Layla, ignoring and keeping his distance from his daughter on one particular visit, even though she was happy to see her dad and was trying to get his attention. George eventually admitted to Julie Ann that he had faked amnesia. Another way George sought Julie Ann's attention was by attempting suicide. In January 2010, 2 months before Julie Ann disappeared, she picked up Layla from George's house. George told her that there was a note in Layla's diaper bag, and George asked her to read at a later time. Julie Ann left the house and stopped her car to read the note, which turned out to be a suicide letter. Concerned for his safety, Julie Ann rushed back to George's house. He had taken some pills, and Julie Ann called 911. Medical personnel were able to save him. On a number of occasions, George arrived unannounced at Walgreens where Julie Ann worked. He'd just hang out in the lobby, making it difficult for Julie Ann to concentrate on her job. Her supervisor, Melinda Burrow, noticed George's stalking and constant calling and became concerned for Julie Ann's safety. Melinda asked George to leave the Walgreens store, and George complied. Julie Ann confided in Melinda that she was worried and felt that George was up to something. Once, Julie Ann called Melinda when she was in her car and said that George was following her in his own car. Julie Ann said that if something ever happened to her, it was him, meaning George. During child exchange interactions, George gave Julie Ann a hard time and tried to keep her from leaving his house, sometimes restraining her by the arms or blocking the doorway. He went as far as jumping on Julie Ann's car as she tried to drive away. His increasingly odd behavior forced Julie Ann to ask family members to accompany her when she was going to drop off or pick up Layla. She also asked the family law court for supervised visits for Layla, as she was concerned for her daughter's safety. George agreed to have his child visitation schedule coincide with his mother's work schedule so that his mother would be home whenever Layla was with him. Julie Ann filed for divorce in December 2009, 3 months before her disappearance. George repeatedly refused to sign the divorce papers and waiver of service, telling her that he did not want the divorce. Before Julie Ann was able to hire a process server to serve George with papers, she disappeared. George was the last person to see her alive on March 26, 2010. The next business day, Monday the 29th, George finally signed the divorce paperwork and filed it with the district clerk's office at the downtown courthouse. There were obviously a lot of red flags indicating that George couldn't accept that Julie had decided to start a new life without him. And of course, it was highly suspicious that he signed the divorce papers the very next business day after Julie disappeared. Jim Cook, a digital forensics expert, examined George's digital footprints and found something suspicious. George played video games every day, sometimes 18 hours a day. However, on the day Julie disappeared, March 26th, George had a 20-hour period when he wasn't using his Xbox. This was atypical for him. The police only had circumstantial evidence, and so they were in no hurry to arrest George. They needed more evidence. Meanwhile, Julie's family continued to do everything they could to bring as much attention to the case as possible. They attended the Dr. Phil show, and it played a key role in the investigation. Here's what the Assistant District Attorney's report says. I quote, "Sandra and her sister Margarita even appeared on the nationally televised Dr. Phil show in California to raise awareness of Julie Ann's disappearance. George, too, appeared on the show. He reiterated to Dr. Phil what he had previously told police, that when Julie Ann showed up at his house, she was acting strangely and asked him to continue watching their daughter because Julie Ann had some stuff to do. George further agreed to take a polygraph test on the show. After failing the polygraph, George became extremely emotional and continued to deny that he had any involvement in his wife's disappearance. Concerned for his well-being, Dr. Phil offered to connect George with a mental health professional upon returning home to Austin. George accepted Dr. Phil's offer, and immediately upon returning to Austin, he checked himself into the Austin Lakes Hospital for a mental health evaluation and remained at the hospital under observation for a few days. So George fails the polygraph test, and this leads his own mother to believe that George may be involved in Julie's disappearance. It's a very important moment that had important ramifications. The report says that Victoria, George's mother, called the police after the Dr. Phil show. I quote, "The turning point in the investigation came after the Dr. Phil show, when George's mother, Victoria, became concerned that her son may have had something to do with Julie Ann's disappearance. While her son was at the mental health facility, Victoria learned from her daughter's boyfriend, Javier Carrasco, that there was a trench under the storage shed in her backyard, furthering her suspicions about her son's involvement. She then called police to examine the trench. With Victoria's consent, the property belonged to her. The police searched the home and yard, with the exception of George's bedroom. Days later, police secured a search warrant for the entire property, including George's bedroom. Though police did not find any evidence of blood, they found various types of ammunition, latex gloves, a knife, remnants of burned clothing from a pit in the backyard, various cleaning products, digging tools near the ominous trench, and a big dirt pile behind the storage shed that was covered with a mattress and other unused household items. Inside the residence and George's room, police collected several items that were purchased with Julie Ann's debit card on the day she disappeared, including baby bath products and a child's DVD movie. Police also collected various electronic devices, computers, George's Xbox, recent Best Buy receipts, more ammunition, and a torn-up photo of Julie Ann that had been taped back together. Law enforcement officers measured the trench and concluded that it was the same length as Julie's height. The trench resembled a grave, but there was no body in it. Police interviewed George's neighbors. On the morning of Julie's disappearance, residents of the neighborhood where George lived reported problems with phone and internet service. A specialist team was dispatched to investigate the cause. The specialist came to George's house and went to the backyard. In speaking with this specialist, police determined that shortly before Julie disappeared, someone had dug deep into the ground and cut the cable, causing a temporary internet outage in the neighborhood. George may have intended to hide Julie's body in his shed, but did not do so because he damaged the cable and realized that someone might come to fix it. The examiner checked George's Xbox again and found out the IP address listed on his account. The expert then analyzed this information to determine who the IP address actually belonged to. It turned out that George was using his mother's neighbor's Wi-Fi. After that, investigators focused on Julie's MySpace entries. They checked the IP address associated with her postings and found that it also belonged to George's neighbor's Wi-Fi connection. This confirmed that George was the one who had been posting on MySpace after Julie's disappearance. So, what evidence did the police have? George was the last person to see Julie. He used her bank card. He failed a polygraph. He sent texts on Julie's behalf. He dug a grave in his backyard. He was jealous. That's the last picture of Julie, and that's the picture they found in George's phone. What the Assistant District Attorney's report on this says, I quote, "She also marked her MySpace page private so that only her friends could view it. Once she separated from George, she deleted him as a friend. Unfortunately, she remained friends with George's cousin, Ariel James, so Ariel, and eventually George too, had access to her posts. In March 2010, just days before her disappearance, Julie Ann posted a photo of her and Aaron at the Austin Zoo. After Julie Ann disappeared, a data extraction of George's cell phone, made pursuant to a search warrant, revealed that George had stored this photo of Julie Ann and Aaron at the zoo on his cell phone. After a thorough investigation, it became apparent that George was responsible for Julie's disappearance and death, and that he had bought time to dispose of her body by using her cell phone and updating her MySpace page, posing as her. But it was very difficult to make an arrest without finding Julie's body. On September 13, 2013, 3.5 years after Julie's disappearance, George was charged with murder by unknown means and was arrested the same day. The report contains some details of what may have happened the day Julie disappeared. I quote, "2 months later, as George was in the Travis County Jail awaiting trial, his cellmate came forward to inform detectives that George had described what had happened between George and Julie Ann. The cellmate, whom we'll call Justin, testified at trial that George had been venting that he and his estranged wife got into an argument because of another man in whom his wife was interested romantically. George told Justin that the argument turned physical and that his wife fell, hit her head, and was rendered unconscious. During the investigation, police discovered that George had dug the trench in his backyard before Julie arrived to pick up Layla, which means he had a prearranged plan. He had a picture on his phone of Julie looking happy with her boyfriend Aaron. George was jealous. He couldn't bear to see Julie start a new life. Authorities believe that George did not bury Julie in the backyard, but took her body somewhere out of the city. Prior to trial, the state offered George Dela Cruz 50 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice in exchange for his guilty plea to murder. But he rejected the state's offer and did not make a counteroffer. George proclaimed his innocence, and through his lawyer, he stated that he did not know what happened to Julie Ann. The case against George required the jury to pay special attention to the evidence, as many pieces had to be tied together to establish the truth. To quash any doubt for jurors that Julie Ann may still be alive, the state produced evidence at trial that there was no proof of life. In this digital world, it is common for people to leave a trace of their movement and activity wherever they go. So to confirm that Julie Ann was dead, that is, that there was no proof of life, detectives and crime analysts performed frequent and automated searches in local, state, and national law enforcement databases, beginning a few weeks after she disappeared in March 2010, and continuing until the day of George's murder trial in April 2015. Police confirmed that Julie Ann did not have any involvement with law enforcement since she was last seen alive in March 2010. The jury deliberated for more than 6 hours before finding George Dela Cruz guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison. He pleaded not guilty and accordingly did not say what happened to Julie or where he hid the body. To date, nearly 15 years after Julie's disappearance, her remains have not been found. George's family was outraged by the verdict. The Dela Cruz family, including his mother, continued to voice their anger outside the courtroom. George is innocent. Sooner or later, she is coming back. Don't stop looking for your daughter. Look everywhere. Because she is somewhere. She is alive, said Victoria Dela Cruz.